started. People will join as we go. But I'm really excited to have you, Matt. Thank you for doing this. Your background in sales is, I think, really interesting and really relevant to a lot of both Country Day alums and current students. So we're excited to hear just all about how you kind of got to where you are today. But as a little background, Matt graduated 2004 from Country Day, went on to Lehigh, and now is the senior account executive at Viacom CBS. So we will hear all about his career and journey, but I like to take it from the top and start back to where it all began. So take us to upper school, Matt. What was that experience like? What sports did you play? What activities were you involved in? Bring us into your world a little bit.
Yeah, and thanks, Annie, for organizing it.
Of course.
Yeah, so Country Day. I was actually a '03 grad, just a
Okay,
minor
sorry.
correction. Not much of a difference there, but yeah, I was. I loved all our class was really tight. I think some classes are not quite as tight as others. It depends.
Yeah.
I think everyone, but we were really a tight crew. A lot of us stay in touch still today, especially with the current circumstances. I think a lot of people have kind of come back together. But I was never very great at sports. I played ice hockey. I played baseball. Those were my two sports. From a club standpoint, I was and just kind of extracurricular. I was in choir. I was in like the Bella Voce. Under Ron Weiler. So kind of the smaller group of sort of traveling choir folks. But those were the main things I did. I was, again, I loved playing hockey. Baseball was kind of never my favorite sport to play, and it's super hyper competitive. But those are the main things I remember doing from an extracurricular standpoint.
Very cool. Yeah. Okay. And then were you in the same building as your brother?
Yeah, my brother was
so
my brother was an '05 grad, so he's 2 years younger. And listen, I think you had the common area as like a kind of an area where he couldn't come into.
Right.
I got to sort of see him pass by and wish he could kind of join. But my brother and I, he's a punk. He's like he still is today. He's living down in Florida now. We're we're in Hoboken, New Jersey, right across the river from Manhattan.
Okay.
So it's been a little obviously different for both of us right now, but yeah, my brother and I were definitely in different circles and different crowds, and he played lacrosse. So just completely different, but yeah, it was funny being in the same building for 2 years together, for sure.
That's fun. That's cool. And you guys went to Country Day pretty much your whole lives, right?
Yeah, from pretty much kindergarten and up. Yeah, we were there.
That's cool. Okay, so take us to junior year, and you're trying to decide where you want to go to college. For all of the students out there who are thinking about college now, and for everyone who's about to go off to college, what were some of the key factors that you were looking for in your college search, and how did you land on Lehigh?
Yeah, so I worked with Ann Sandoval. So she was great. She was super helpful in terms of just, I sat down with her a few times just to understand what was, what could I get into? What was just kind of not something that I should even try for. So, I did some soul searching on that in terms of my grades, my extracurriculars, what I could highlight for the schools that I was going and considering. I wasn't really considering any sports as an avenue for me to get into any school. So I kind of ruled that out. And I knew that I wanted to go to a school that was going to have classroom sizes that were anywhere between 20 to 40, maybe even 50.
Got it.
Occasionally, every even smaller schools are going to still have the classes that are big. But I knew that I didn't want to, be going into classroom settings that were going to be 400 or 500 people for every single class. Just wasn't, University of Michigan, Michigan State, those classes are obviously much larger. I felt I think it's important for people when they're considering the schools to feel what do they want it, how do they work well, and how do they feel like they're going to be held accountable at those schools. Personally, I felt like if I went to a class, if I had a classroom that was 400 or 500, I was just going to be another person in the class. I wasn't going to necessarily feel as obligated to go regularly. And for me personally, I needed that kind of, I needed to kind of feel the pressure of going to class every day. And so I chose, So I went to Lehigh University. After visiting the school, I went up and down kind of the East Coast, looking at a bunch of different schools. some Ivy,
Hmm.
mostly not Ivy schools. But I was looking for anywhere between like 3 or 4 or 5,000
Okay.
in terms of undergrad, and Lehigh was on the upper end of that, around 5,000. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so I loved it. I knew I was gonna that I wanted to go into business. They
Okay.
have a
So you knew
really
that right away.
Yeah, I knew I wanted to go into business. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do yet, so I took a diverse amount of classes my first year, from
Hmm.
finance to marketing
Okay.
to economics, I just kind of drove. I was driven towards the marketing side of things. I liked the
Yeah.
creative aspect of it. I liked, um, I've always been fascinated with how production works, from
Hmm.
commercials, and we're currently on Instagram, which is
Yeah.
arguably one of the most sort of prominent marketing tools for companies out there in the world.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I don't really regret that choice in Lehigh at all. It was,
Awesome.
also helpful
Okay.
to have a classmate who went with me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So, what role did the Country Day Network play for you? Sounds like right away, obviously, when you were graduating, but what role did the network play for you when you were at Lehigh?
Yeah, I mean, it was helpful to have a couple guys who were going to school. A guy named Pradeep said he was at the school. He was
Hmm.
studying neuroscience at the time.
Okay.
And he and another guy from Country Day were like, "Hey, come on down, we'll hang. We'll show you the campus." So I
Oh,
kind
very
of
cool.
got an opportunity to, like, quote
Yeah.
unquote, get a chance to see the
Yeah.
nightlife scene at
Okay.
Lehigh too. But one of my friends who I was on the hockey team with, Andrew Ritchie, ended up going there for
Oh, okay.
engineering, and so he and I just stayed close,
So you went together.
and we went together. We ended up, after freshman year, we ended up rooming together for the last 3 years of school,
Okay.
along with a few other guys.
Okay. And then there were other people that came behind you. Like I know Paul Fabre went there, and so the classes were, there were
Yeah,
probably a few people from every Country Day class that were
yeah. Paul
when you were
Fabre
there.
was there, and he and I would see each other on the regular.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was good. It was good
Yeah.
seeing, like, it's funny to see that many. We have, I think at the time, I think when I was there in the middle of my time at Lehigh, we had probably 6 or 7 Lehigh students there,
Okay.
total. Sorry, Country Day
Yeah.
students there at the same
Yeah.
time, and it's kind of interesting because it's a small East Coast school.
Yeah. Exactly. That's really interesting. So you are about to graduate from Lehigh and you're obviously looking for your first job. So how did you kind of land your first job? You have worked for some of the biggest media companies in the world, and I think a lot of people would be really interested in learning how you kind of broke into that environment and any advice that you would have for students in getting their first job right out of college.
Sure. Well, again, so when I was in college, I tried to find areas where I could get at least a couple of additional resume builders. So
Mm-hmm.
I ended up joining the marketing club because
Okay.
I knew that would be important. It also would give me an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. The marketing club would go to different companies and learn about how their operations would work holistically, but also from really more specifically from the marketing end.
Okay.
So we went around to, like, different areas around Lehigh, like in Pennsylvania. Some companies
Sure.
like QVC, one of being like really close by, is obviously they're
Yeah.
basically a marketing company at the end
I
of the
didn't know they
day.
were so close to you. Okay.
Yeah, so we saw them. We went to New York a few times. We went to New Jersey companies a couple times. There's just so many corporate companies set up in the kind of like 100-mile radius. Anyways, I went to marketing. I joined the marketing club. Ended up becoming the marketing club president the following year. They asked me if I
Okay.
could do that, and that kind of was a good resume builder. That was one aspect of something I think I would encourage people when they're at school to just find a couple of extracurricular. It doesn't have to be like sports. Like, sports are not the only extracurricular
Right.
activities in college. You have plenty of those types of things. So join a club, especially if it's in your field. It's kind of a low touch thing. It doesn't require a lot of your time
Mm-hmm.
initially. It required a little more of my time once I became the president of this small club. But I think that also the network aspect is important. When
Mm-hmm.
you're in school, networking is going to come casually. You're going to find friends. But when you're in classes and when you're in clubs and on sports, you're going to end up becoming friends with people who are going to
Right.
have similar paths to you, and they're going to be a couple years older than you. And so I
Mm-hmm.
got lucky in the sense that a girl that I worked with, that I had classes with, I worked on projects with, I was in the
Mm-hmm.
marketing club with. She ended up going to News Corporation, which owns the New York Post, and I ended up getting a job there right out of school. They had
Okay.
they had a recruiting program for people right out of
Oh,
college.
cool. Okay.
And they were looking for 10 people or so that given year that I was there. And her name was Michelle. She was like, hey, would you be interested in joining this, this program? And I was like, I was already looking at a couple of different marketing agencies in New York.
Okay.
And so I was kind of going more on the buy side of things for marketing. And I ended up making, kind of luckily getting onto the sell side of advertising. And I was, became a account coordinator at New York Post, which is kind of like really just kind of mailroom type job, like doing a lot of the day-to-day grunt work. But, after about a year of that, I was promoted, and then I got promoted again, and it just kind of went from there.
Okay. So it sounds like the role that like your network played was obviously huge in helping you get this job. And then also you have to be willing to kind of do the grunt work, as you say, initially to then become promoted and move up the chain.
Listen, everyone wants that like sort of dream job that they have in mind, and they want it tomorrow. But like, if you're going to go to a big company, a big organization, you're just not going to, you need to have that experience first. And so finding your way in is important, and being willing to do sort of the more like Excel sheet work and like, literally just like data entry and things like that are just like, you're learning while you're doing it, but it's not necessarily the like most exciting job out of college. But, if you do well at that, like within 6 to 12 months, you're probably going to get promoted. So,
Okay. So walk us through your career since the New York Post. I'm always so curious as to what prompts someone's career change or company change. So if you could shed a little bit of light on that too, that would be great. I think it would be really interesting to learn about kind of all the different companies you've worked for and why.
Yeah. So in media, it's a high churn business. Like, people will move around a lot to get different experience on different accounts, meaning like different clients, whether it be Pepsi or, an airline or any like a B2B company, like just getting different experience in travel and in consumer packaged goods and in technology. Like, you might want to move around. As you get, as your first roll out of school, you're just kind of, again, doing that grunt work and you're kind of getting your chops. But as you become more senior and get promoted once or twice, people recognize that. They see that on your LinkedIn. It's important to have your LinkedIn regularly updated. There's a lot of tools in LinkedIn that can help you just simply like sort of toggle on that I'm interested in potentially opportunities if somebody else wants to come and approach me. That's been successful for me. That's how I went from Viacom. That's how I went from CBS to Facebook. That's how I've for a little while. So I would recommend that you have all of that kind of material updated regularly so that people can see your progress in your career. And ultimately, yes, from a network standpoint, it's incredibly important to stay close with everybody. Don't burn bridges. You never know. I'm a good example of this. Like, I went from CBS to Facebook for a little less than a year. I really, didn't like working there for any number of reasons. It's a great company, but the team I was on, it's often the people you're around and you're surrounded with closely that you work with are the most important reason why you want to work there, why you want to stay. And so I had a really good relationship with the people at CBS that I worked with, and they, hired me right back. So, and now it's now a bigger company as Viacom CBS. So MTV, VH1, Comedy Central, the list goes on of all the things that Viacom brings to CBS.
That's really interesting. Say a little bit more about your experience with going to CBS and then coming back to CBS later, because I think sometimes students don't necessarily realize that it's actually like fairly common for someone to leave a company, and then, like you said, if you have those good relationships, you can always return.
Yeah, I mean, I'm called a boomerang at CBS because I did that. It was a rather quick one, and I think there's always going to be opportunities at the companies that you've worked at, and that you have great relationships with. Those people who are still there, who are coworkers, who are bosses. So, when I left CBS, it was not like I hate working here and I'm out. It was more of a, like, I have a really good opportunity. I'm going to go check it out. It's Facebook. They own Instagram. Like, it's the largest social company ever. And one of the largest media companies ever. So it was like a really good opportunity to go work there. And tons of perks and benefits. but going back to CBS, when I was, it was as simple as this. I was having a drink with an old boss casually, and I was telling him I was a little frustrated with my role and that I wasn't, for a number of reasons, I was having some issues with the team I was working on. And, these are common things that anybody will have at any company, no matter the size, no matter whatever. And he basically said, like, hey, I think I'm hearing that there's a role opening up on this other division. Would you be interested? And I said, yeah, like, put me in touch with the person who is the hiring manager for that role. And it just kind of spawned from there. And then here I am back at a now much larger Viacom CBS operation.
Got it.
So yeah, I mean, just keeping in touch with your network, whether it be at Country Day, whether it be at your university, your college, or whatever company you're at or move to, just staying close with those folks. You never know how it can kind of like turn around into some form of opportunity.
Exactly. And I love too how you used those connections, which is something that I try to talk about with students a lot in terms of like the actual job application process of you had your connection, like do that warm intro for you so that your resume could just be easily passed on to the hiring manager, which is so important.
And from a resume standpoint, I've had a lot of guidance on that in the past. I actually worked for a very short period of time as a kind of a consultant role at a company that was called Ladders, which was helping hire for like recruiting and hiring for 100K plus jobs. So like kind of like executive level roles.
Sure.
And they had a whole division that would specifically talk about how to build a resume. And I think it's really important when you're, this is often a piece of paper that gets put in front of somebody and they maybe spend 30 seconds, sometimes a minute, maybe 2 minutes on and looking at it before they either put it into the let's bring them in or let's not kind of pile. And so you can't just go out with one resume for every role that you're submitting for or you're trying to get hired for. You have to customize that resume based on the job description and what you think you bring to the table for that job. You should take the extra hour for every job you're submitting that resume to and customize it just a little bit to match back with what that job is looking for. Because again, if that hiring manager or that HR recruiter is looking at that job title, that role, and then taking a look at your resume, like there are certain buzzwords and things. But there's certain things that they're going to be looking for. And if you haven't taken the time to match your resume towards what that role might be, then they're going to notice that. And, again, you can't just create sort of a one size fits all resume for every job you're submitting for.
That is awesome advice. Thank you for sharing that with us, especially as someone who looked at a ton of resumes. I think that's super helpful. So tell us a little bit about your job now. Like, give us a little bit of the day to day in your current role, and how has that, I think we know a little bit how it's probably changed since Corona, but we would just be curious too on like how the business side of your role has changed and what you're seeing in the market.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, COVID-19, the disruption I'll kind of leave to the side because it's just more of this, right? It's more video. It's more video conferencing and less meetings with clients in person, more of this, which is fine. And it's in some ways good. Yes. But, my day-to-day, I'm as an account executive at Viacom CBS, my role is on the sales side. I am working directly with major corporate companies. I'm kind of in this sort of working with some of the more of the blue chip companies out there. So examples being, right now I'm working with Microsoft, Samsung. Okay. So obviously recognizable.
For somebody who doesn't know what a blue chip company is, can you just define that for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, it really just means very, very, very high net worth companies that often are usually commanding billions and billions of dollars in revenue every year. So it just means, it's any one of the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 kind of companies that you might recognize. Pepsi, Coca-Cola, there's tons of them. But, it just means that they're big companies. They require a lot of handhold white glove service. Yeah. So, I am only working on 2 or 3 accounts, whereas somebody who I work with might work with 20 or 30 because they're just smaller companies. So, my day is often spent a lot of times on email and phone calls and video conferencing, asking our clients what they're looking for, what they need, how can we help them with all the different things that Viacom CBS has. We have TV channels that are household names, Comedy Central, BET, VH1, Paramount, CBS, all on its own, has CBS Sports and CBS News. So companies like Microsoft, companies like Samsung, or if you're Coca-Cola, they're looking for us in how to get in front of the right people at the right time, whether it be a tentpole like the Video Music Awards or the Super Bowl, which, CBS has this year in February.
Hi, sorry about that.
We're back. No worries.
We're back. Okay, so I lost you at, you were just explaining to us how you help your companies get in front of the correct audience that they want to be in front of.
Yeah, I mean, those tangible examples, just to kind of like pull it full circle, would be something like, clients might look for, Microsoft has a massive NFL partnership. CBS will have the Super Bowl this year. So we're working with them on, Super Bowl might seem like it's so far off, but it's the largest media event in the world ever, when it occurs. Everyone knows how much these companies will spend on like one commercial spot, but also there's a lot of like digital media that goes into it. I work on the more digital side of things. So online advertising for the most part, or social, or so, we will work with them in terms of figuring out how to integrate them into the broadcast of the Super Bowl. We will figure out how to target the millions and millions of viewers who are viewing that day with their messaging. And if we can integrate their message in unique ways, like, they have, if it's a tablet surface, or I think they also have what's called Teams, which is like a video conferencing service. They're focused on those types of lines of business for themselves and trying to figure out how to like integrate them into shows. So that's where my role comes in. It's kind of like I hate to use the word quarterback, but like that's my role, is kind of I'm like the bottleneck for internal conversations and the external conversations with clients to get them to spend their, media dollars with us, as opposed to maybe some of our competition like NBC or whoever it might be, as well as even social media like Facebook and Instagram. Just kind of proving out the value of our brands and what they bring and the audience that we bring to the table.
Okay. I know you mentioned this a little earlier in terms of the program that you were part of at the New York Post, but for students who are really interested in getting into the type of work that you're doing, what advice would you have for a Country Day senior or even a Country Day alum who's in college, in terms of lining up experiences for themselves that will help propel them to where you are?
Yeah, I think you just have to start from the bottom, realize that you're not going to get right into the role that I'm in right away. It might not take 10 years. It might only take 1 or 2 years for some people.
Sure.
But you have to be able to be willing to take some potentially smaller roles at first when you're going in. And I think if you want to get into, like, I'm on the sales side of a big, huge media company. If you want to go that route, like, find what kind of roles they're offering that get you into the sort of account management level of things.
Right.
And eventually, and then from the moment you join, and I think even when you're being hired, it's important to start asking about what are the opportunities for that role that I'm looking at or I want. So if you know what path you want to take is kind of important.
Okay.
I can tell you, I personally didn't necessarily know what path I wanted to take right out of college, but I ended up on the sales side and I've loved it. But I would say that, being willing to kind of take a year or two of just kind of doing that remedial daily work that maybe somebody who, I'm not necessarily doing that kind of work nowadays. That's important, because if you can do that, it'll obviously put a foundation to what you know about the industry, and you can learn from it. And then you can showcase that, you're willing, all those things that they kind of put on resumes and that they ask for in the job roles, like hardworking and passionate and detail oriented and all those things. Like, you can at least have that experience to show. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, would just be willing to take kind of the role that then can ladder into a position. And I think also a lot of times people are too fearful in companies to ask for the job they want. And because they don't want to be creating friction, or they don't want to be seen pushy. But, I think if you want a role, you should start to say, hey, what are the things I need to be doing at this company to get myself to that position, and start asking your manager and other people, what are those things that you should be showcasing from yourself?
Okay, that's so helpful. And I have one more question, and it actually might tie into what you just said. So if it would be the same, no big deal, but what advice would you give to your 12th grade self at Country Day from where you're sitting today?
I think probably do a little bit better in school. Probably would be the advice then. But I would say to not worry too much about every little extracurricular thing that you need to be doing. I think that those things eventually and pretty quickly become small bylines on your resume.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to just sort of figure out what you don't want to do before you figure out what you really want to do. Because I personally, I can tell you when I was in high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I knew when I was in college, I didn't necessarily knew what I wanted to do, but I knew that when I started taking finance classes in college, that I did not want to do that.
Yeah.
And there are people who I kind of felt they felt the same way, but they still went the finance route. Yes. And then they decided pretty quickly that this was just, the hours were awful. And and I think lastly, it's that money is not necessarily everything. I mean, if you're going into business, you're going into, money is not going to necessarily be making you happy every day. So I think finding a good company, finding the right people who you can work with. And the last piece of advice that I wish, and it's not my 12-year-old self anymore, but it would be good information for anybody who's coming out of school or kind of is, obviously work really hard on your grades, because I can tell you when I went to college, my freshman year, I had really bad grades. I was just letting loose, I'll be honest. And I was, and I'll be honest, I had a conversation with the dean not too long into that. She was basically like, hey, if you continue on this path, your grades are going to be irreversible when you're going to have set up. And so kind of from that moment on, which was kind of like midway through my freshman year, I just started going to the library every day. I kind of forced myself to stop doing the same habits that I had been doing for the first semester of college. I sort of forced myself to get into a closed environment at the library and just sort of put headphones on and stay focused for a chunk of time every day. And that really helped me. So if, finding the kind of bad habits you have, and then kind of finding ways to kind of avoid them is good advice. But then also when you're potentially looking at a job to get hired, I would not just meet with the person who's hiring with you. My advice would be to ask to meet, especially if they're showing interest in you. I would say I think it's important to ask to meet, talk to, or have at least a phone call with somebody else who would be side by side with you. Because
that's great advice.
Those are going to be the people who define your experience at that company. If you like working at this company, it's often because the person sitting next to you or the person you work for is someone you get along with well, and then therefore your work can shine. Getting to know some of the other folks as opposed to just maybe the hiring the recruiter at the company, because you're not going to necessarily work with that person.
I love that. That is great advice, Matt. Thank you so much. This was so fun. I'm sorry about the little internet snafu, but we fixed it. Thank you again. So good to see you and have you on here, and hope to see you in person soon.
Yeah, good to see you, Annie.
Okay.
Stay safe. Stay